The Feast of Our Lady of Sorrows, also known as the Memorial of Our Lady of Sorrows, commemorates the deep suffering and sorrow experienced by the Virgin Mary as the Mother of Jesus Christ. It is observed on September 15th, following the Feast of the Exaltation of the Holy Cross on September 14th. The feast reflects on the sorrows that Mary endured throughout her life, especially those related to the suffering and crucifixion of her Son, Jesus Christ. It invites the faithful to meditate on the compassionate suffering of Mary and to seek her intercession and comfort in times of personal suffering. The devotion to Our Lady of Sorrows has roots in the early church, but the feast as it is known today was officially established in the 13th century. It was promoted by the Servite order, who had a particular devotion to the seven sorrows of Mary. The feast was celebrated in various places before being universally recognized in 1233. The seven sorrows, which are central to the devotion, are the prophecy of Simeon, Luke 2:34-35. Simeon foretold the suffering Mary would experience due to the fate of her son. To be a Christian means to be associated with Christ, who suffered and died for us. Mary was the first to feel this. Even as she brought her son to the temple to participate in the celebration of the presentation, she is presented with this prophecy from Simeon, "A sword your soul shall pierce." He tells her that she, too, will suffer. She immediately must face what this will ultimately mean for her. If Mary, who was sinless, would with joy accept a sword from divine sinlessness, then who of us, say Sheen, who are guilty of sin, shall ever complain if the same Jesus permits us a sorrow for the remission of our sins? We too must suffer. So often I have thoughts like, why me, Lord? Why this cross? What have I done to deserve this? Unlike Mary, who accepted her suffering, I often want to run from it. Pride prevents me from accepting it. Yet, when I look to Mary, I am consoled in understanding that she knows this. The sword which pierced Mary's heart did not come only from being a witness to the suffering of her son. It also came from those who would pierce him and deliver him up. Her heart goes out to sinners. Her heart goes out to mine. The flight into Egypt, Matthew 2:13-15. Mary and Joseph's flight to Egypt to escape King Herod's massacre of infants. Sometimes our suffering is the result of mistakes we make, and sometimes it comes to us from an external source. Either way, we must try to endure with a trusting obedience, as Mary did when she and Joseph fled to Egypt with Jesus. Fulton Sheen describes why we can turn to our mother even when we sin, and how she will always look on us with compassion. He, on his side, will not destroy their freedom, and they, on their side, will not choose him. But as Mary in this second dolor was not angry with the wicked, but unhappy for their sakes, so now in heaven her compassion and love of sinners almost seem to rise with the measure of their sin. This is how Mary ultimately captured my heart, and why I turn to her so readily in times of trouble. I used to see Mary's sinlessness as an obstacle. After all, how could she understand me, a sinner? Yet when I think of her as my mother, and as one who sorrows over my sinfulness, I learn to trust her. She sorrows over my sins because she knows that it makes me sorrowful too. She knows that true happiness can only be found within the arms of her loving and merciful Son. She does not stand in judgment, but instead reaches out her hand to deliver us to her Son, who she knows is full of mercy. The loss of the child. Jesus in the temple, Luke 2:41-50. Mary and Joseph's anguish when they lost Jesus for 3 days. It is easy for me to think of Mary as always having had knowledge of her son, and that somehow this made it easier for her. Yet the loss of Jesus in the temple shows us that she did not always have that knowledge. She too suffered when she did not understand what he was doing, and when she could not find Jesus. Her son was hidden from her, and this brought her spiritual darkness. As Christians, we suffer a loss of God when we sin. To have him and then lose him by our own doing is a great suffering for us. Mary, although without sin, also knew the pain of losing her son, and it is she who teaches us to go in search of him. Mary lost Jesus only in a mystical darkness of the soul, not in the moral blackness of an evil heart, says Sheen. But she does teach us that when we lose God, we must not wait for him to come back. We must go out in search of him. And, to the joy of every sinner, she knows where he can be found. Mary meets Jesus on the way to Calvary. Luke 23:27-31. Mary's encounter with Jesus as he carries his cross to Golgotha. As a mother, I can only imagine Mary's pain when she saw her suffering son. We wish to take away the sorrow and suffering that our children inevitably suffer, and yet we know that they go through these trials only to be stronger in the end. Often the best we can do is listen and let them know we are there and that we understand. Jesus met his mother as he was being led to his execution. Mary did not protest in that moment, which would have been an understandable thing to do. She did not yell or scream or lash out at the soldiers and try to prevent them from torturing her son more. Instead, she met his gaze with a sorrow that revealed a deep knowledge of the truth of that hour. This is the same knowledge that she brings to us. We can draw comfort from her because she has an intimate knowledge of Jesus. Not only in the moment of his great suffering, but in our own sufferings, big and small, she meets our gaze with the love and compassion of a mother who knows our grief and who offers to us the only true consolation, her son. The crucifixion and death of Jesus. John 19:25-30. Mary witnessing the crucifixion and death of her son. Seeing his mother there with the disciple whom he loved, Jesus said to his mother, "Woman, there is your son." In turn, he said to the disciple, "There is your mother." From that hour onward, the disciple took her into his own home. John 19:25-27. Pope St. John Paul II had a special devotion to the Virgin Mary, who he said was a gift which Christ himself makes personally to every individual. I love what he said about Mary's place at the foot of the cross. There, at the foot of the cross, begins that special entrusting of humanity to the Mother of Christ, which in the history of the Church has been practiced and expressed in different ways. Entrusting himself to Mary in a filial manner, the Christian, like the Apostle John, welcomes the Mother of Christ into his own home and brings her into everything that makes up his inner life. The body of Jesus being taken down from the cross. Luke 23:50-54. John 19:38-40. Mary's grief as Jesus' body is taken down and placed in her arms. Mary is there throughout the life of her son. She bore him into this world, and she is there at his death. She is seen on the road to Calvary and meets the eyes of her son there, bearing his sufferings too. She is there at the foot of the cross. Those who attend someone's deathbed are usually those who are the closest to the dying, for it is an intimate and difficult experience. At the crucifixion, most of the disciples fled, with the exception of John. Mary was there to see it through. That is why we can count on Mary to be there for our sufferings and sorrows and to never abandon us. Perhaps we feel that, like many of the disciples, we have abandoned God. Yet he will never abandon us, and Mary is there always to bring us back. The burial of Jesus. John 19:41-42. Mary's sorrow as Jesus is laid in the tomb. Venerable Fulton Sheen explains in The World's First Love that Mary will bear the scars of Christ's passion in her own soul. No one can tell the griefs that either bore, and no one can tell the holiness that she achieved through sharing, as much as she could as a creature, in his act of redemption. All the fatherless, motherless, sonless, husbandless, and wifeless griefs that ever tore at the hearts of human beings were now bearing down on the soul of Mary. It is hard to lose a son or a daughter, but it is harder to bury Christ. To be motherless is a tragedy, but to be Christless is hell. Mary shared our human nature in everything except sin. She suffered sorrows and understands the human condition not only because she experienced affliction, but because she feels the pain and sorrow of all the children whom God has placed under her care. This is why we must fly to thee, O Virgin of Virgins, my Mother. On this feast day, the Church holds special masses and prayers dedicated to Our Lady of Sorrows. The liturgy often includes hymns and prayers that reflect on the sufferings of Mary and the profound sorrow she experienced as the Mother of Jesus. Devotion. The devotion to Our Lady of Sorrows encourages the faithful to unite their own sufferings with those of Mary, finding strength and solace in her example of faith and perseverance. It also emphasizes the importance of compassion and empathy in the face of suffering. The feast serves as a reminder of Mary's profound role in the redemption story and her deep love and sorrow for her Son, inviting believers to grow in their own faith and compassion.